All right, good evening, everyone. We'll call this meeting of the North College Hill City Council to order. We'll start with our prayer. God, our Father, we are all your servants. We trust in your mercy and love. We trust also in your guidance. Direct the meetings of this council of North College Hill to make good decisions for all the people who live in our city. Give all the members of this council wisdom and insight to know what is best for our city. Help us to be fair and just in all our decisions. Bless us all to do the very best we can with your help and guidance. We pray this in your name. Amen. We will also do the national anthem. Pledge of Allegiance. My apologies. Hadn't done that one in a while. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, Mrs. Dewald, please call the roll.
Miss Bailey,
Here.
Mr. Hedger, Miss Underwood,
Here.
Mr. Miller Novak,
Here.
Miss Zorb,
Here.
Miss Hartman,
Here.
Mr. O'Shea, Mr. O'Shea,
Sorry about
I
that.
see you. Am I correct that Mr. Hedger is not in the lineup or?
At this
Yeah.
moment, you are correct.
Mr. President,
Ms. Zorb?
so I did just receive a text back from him. He says he's having difficulties with his internet and would like me to text him the phone number to call in. So I will do that now. So he'll probably be in just a skosh later. I gotta
Okay.
look up the number first. I don't have it readily available to me. Just a heads
Mr.
up.
President,
Ms. Dewald?
so I'm assuming it's okay to mark him as present or we're treading new waters here now.
I mean, I wouldn't, let's not mark him absent just yet.
Perfect,
We can come back to that if we have to.
thank you.
All right, so at this time, you do have tonight's agenda in front of you.
Mr. President,
Ms. Zorb?
I'll make a motion to adopt the agenda.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood?
I'll second her motion.
All right, I have the motion on the floor from Ms. Zorb with a second from Ms. Underwood to adopt tonight's agenda. Discussion?
Yeah, Mr. President,
Mr. Miller Novak?
I thought that Mr. Mosby had sent an email saying a couple things were missing from the agenda.
Ms. Dewald?
Mr. President, I am to receive any legislation to be added to the agenda by Wednesday evening, and that did not happen. So if I receive nothing, I can't post anything. I actually think I sent that information in the email in response to Mr. Mosby.
Mr. President,
Mr. Mosby?
thank you. Both Mr. Miller Novak and Mr. Wall are correct. My concern is that of the three pieces of legislation that did not appear, one is time sensitive. I know that I have been presenting to council regularly that the tax budget is due in July. And if that is going to happen, council wishes to have 3 readings. If we're going to meet that deadline, the first reading must be tonight.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood?
Mr. Mosby, I have received a copy of the tax budget. However, I have not received a copy of the ordinance or resolution. Do you by any chance have that?
Mr. President?
Mr. Mosby?
Yes, I do. I actually thought that I did send it out earlier. However, if I did not, I can resend it. Again, the one that is most important is the tax budget.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood?
I'm just wondering if the other members, if anyone has received a copy of the legislation that accompanies the tax budget, or am I the only one who just did, maybe I missed it?
I did not see a copy of the tax budget legislation.
Mr. President,
Ms. Bailey?
I am looking for it and I have the tax budget, but I do not have the legislation that goes along with it. I don't.
Mr. President.
Mr. Miller Novak?
Yeah, if we don't have it, we can't really do a first reading. I mean, it's summer. I know we only have normally one regular meeting per month. I guess we'll just have to make a point to have a special meeting at some point in time to discuss the tax budget and make sure we can do 3 readings. Ron, can you get everything to us before the next meeting, at least?
Yes, I will send that with our next package to Ms. DeWald and Mr. President.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the motion on the floor from Ms. Zorb, second from Ms. DeWald.
So is Mr. Dieters here? I see his name up, but he's not here.
He is here.
He is here. So I have a question. So no one has seen the legislative part of the tax budget. If that is sent to me, do I forward it then to the president of council so he can disseminate it to the appropriate committee? I mean, I know that this stuff has to do a certain song and dance before it ends up in somebody's lap. So is there a way that we can shorten that and still do it logistically?
I'm not sure I understand your question. I mean, he either could send it to the finance committee or send it to all the council individuals.
Okay, so the only reason it really needs to be sent to me is to put it on the agenda. So Mr. Mosby can send that legislation straight then to finance so they can look it over.
Right, if they haven't already looked it over. Now, the tax budget's a pretty perfunctory thing. It's just identifying that you are appropriating funds sufficient enough to levy the taxes for which you're authorized for. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the budget of the city. It's kind of a old archaic thing that still exists. But yes, I mean, if the finance committee wants to review it first, that would be the appropriate place for it to go. And then of course, all legislation should go to you to make sure it's on the agenda. And then however, if you're the one that also pushes it out to everybody, then you could do that as well.
Right. So just for clarification, I was only referring to the actual piece of legislation. I know that council has the tax budget, most likely has reviewed it. What they have not reviewed or read over is the actual piece of legislation. So I thought if you could skip giving it to me, give it to finance. Finance can then say, hey, we're ready to put this on the agenda, and then send it off to me.
Yeah, although what I'm saying is that if it's the language that I think it is, Mary or Mr. President, it's a very simple resolution that the county gives you that they want you to pass. It just says you approve the attached budget. There's very little substance in it other than saying this budget's being approved. So it may not be something that needs to be vetted through finance. I think probably finance would want to take a look at the actual budget, but the actual document approving it is a very simple ministerial document.
Mr. President,
Ms. Bailey?
Mr. Dieters, we have it like Exhibit A, but we don't have the resolution part. We have the budget itself like Attachment A, but not the actual piece of legislation.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying is that I think that if
Okay.
correct, Ron. It's just the sample one that the county probably gives you that they have you attach, that you attach the budget to, correct?
Mr. President,
Mr. Mosby.
yes, Mr. Dieters, that is correct.
Mr. President,
Mr. Miller Novak.
I mean, and that's the issue. I mean, the tax budget itself has already been vetted through Finance Committee. And if we got to do 3 readings of the resolution by July, because it's one of those deals, same thing like a contract where you have a resolution that just incorporates the budget as an attachment. And it's basically just saying, this is our budget. So it seems like we're burning a lot of daylight to throw such a simple document into finance when the actual substance of it is the attachment, not the actual resolution. So why lose that time? We should probably just put it on the floor next meeting.
So Mr. Mosby will send it out and we will have it on the agenda for the next meeting. So back to adopting tonight's agenda. We had the motion from Ms. Zorb, second from Ms. Underwood. Please call the roll.
Ms. Bailey?
Yes.
Mr. President,
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to clarify, we are making a motion to accept the agenda as
Yes,
presented.
As
There's no
written.
changes.
Yes, as written.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Thank you. Mr. Hedger?
Mr. President,
Yes.
I'm sorry. Who was that?
that was
Yes.
Mr. O'Shea.
Mr. O'Shea?
Yeah, I think for the record, we need to note that Mr. Hedger has become.
Yes. Mr. Hedger is now in attendance.
Thank you. So Ms. Bailey has voted yes. Mr. Hedger?
Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Ms. Underwood?
Yes.
Mr. Miller Novak?
Yes.
Ms. Zorb?
Yes.
Ms. Hartman?
yes,
Mr. O'Shea?
Yes,
Motion passes 7-0 to accept the agenda as presented.
Thank you. Next, we have the minutes from the council meeting on 5/4/2020.
Mr. President,
Ms. Dewald.
I would like to add here that the first meeting minutes that I sent out along with the original agenda, I had the wrong date written on the top. So the revised one, it was simply a change of date. So I did not reprint the meeting minutes. Now for the actual official record, there'll be a reprinted one with the correct date on it. But I thought those that have the paper copy can just go ahead and change the date themselves.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Ms. Zorb.
I'll make a motion to adopt the minutes.
We have a motion from Ms. Zorb.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
I'll second the motion.
We have a motion on the floor from Ms. Zorb, second from Ms. Underwood to adopt the meeting minutes from 5/4/2020. Discussion. Please call the roll.
Ms. Bailey,
Yes.
Mr. Hedger,
Yes.
Ms. Underwood,
Yes.
Mr. Miller Novak,
Yes.
Ms. Zorb,
Yes.
Ms. Hartman,
yes,
and Mr. O'Shea.
abstain.
Motion passes 6-0. I guess abstain is a 0. Guess?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
All right, Ms. Dewald, we're up to communications.
Alrighty, for our communications, we have a copy of the March, April Cities and Villages magazine. Of course, we only get the one copy. If council is so inclined, they can go to www.omlohio.org to see what's on the inside of that magazine.
Is
Mr.
that it?
President,
Yes, that's all for
Okay.
correspondence.
Mr.
Ms. Underwood.
President,
Ms. Underwood.
Ms. Dewald, there was an email sent to all of council by Shelby Brown, and I thought that Mr. O'Shea forwarded that email to you or to Mr. Mosby. I'm just making sure that somebody is aware of that email and is going to address it.
Oh, that was the one where he gave the resident the information to contact me?
I believe so. And I referred to Shelby Brown as a he. I think it's a she. I apologize for that. I'm just making sure that that email or that communication doesn't get lost in the shuffle, that someone is going to respond to Ms. Brown's concerns.
So I did, let me look up that.
Mr. President,
Mr. Mosby.
yes, I did receive a telephone call from Ms. Brown, and I did respond to her concerns.
Okay. We'll move on to committee reports, budget and finance.
Sorry guys, we met on the 11th. We were presented the preliminary tax budget. We talked about some legislation that we are working through in finance committee that I need to get to Mr. Dieters ASAP. And our next meeting will be the second Monday in June at 7:30. And that's all I got.
So that
Mr.
date would be
President?
June the 8th.
Yes.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. It's the second Monday of the month.
Right, June 8th.
Yep.
Mr. President,
Ms. Dewald.
I didn't hear what she had to say for Mr. Dieters and getting something to him ASAP.
Ms. Dewald, there are quite a few pieces of legislation that finance has talked about and kicked around that are in the process of being fine-tuned as far as as where they're going, and then I need to get them to Mr. Dieters so the law director can write them, read them, fix them, do all of that
Okay,
fun stuff.
so the word I'm looking for was legislation. You need to get legislation to him ASAP.
Yes,
Because when
ma'am.
I go to rewind the movie.
Right, the
this.
cinema. That's why. Yes, ma'am. Sorry.
That's all right. All righty,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bailey. Next up, city and community development and recreation.
Mr. President,
Mr. Hedger.
thank you. So we met last Monday and we discussed, or last Monday, let's see. We discussed still rescheduling the public hearing for the permits and sign legislation, conditional use. We also continue discussing about the Tree City and creating the board and getting the legislation and proclamation created so that we can move forward with that. And then we kind of had an open discussion about some community events coming up, hopefully after everything kind of dies down concerning the stay-at-home orders and things like that. Other than that, our next meeting is on June the 8th at 6:30.
Mr. President, Mary Dewald here.
Ms. Dewald?
Um, for some reason, the voices are cutting out. I'm hearing sometimes like every other word. So when I go to revisit this tape, it's going to be the same problem. So what I got from Mr. Hedger is that they met last Monday. They are again rescheduling for the public hearing for the sign legislation.
It is the conditional use and permit sign legislation.
Conditional use. And then you said something about Tree City, and then I just heard not much.
Sorry. So yeah, we talked about the Tree City USA, how to become one. We talked about the legislation and proclamation that has to happen so that we can submit our application. And then we discussed kind of, in general, a community event after kind of the COVID-19 dies down.
Oh, okay. So you said a general community event.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mr. Hedger, and I think we all could agree a community event would be real nice right now.
Yes.
Next up, public safety.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
our last meeting was last week. Our next meeting is, our last meeting was 2 weeks ago. I've already reported about that meeting. Our next meeting is Monday, May 25th at 7:30 p.m.
Thank you. Rules and
Mr.
public policy.
President,
Yes, Ms. Nichols.
that's a holiday.
Yes, it has to be the Tuesday, the 26th.
Okay, Tuesday, the 26th. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Tracy. I mean,
Mis-
Madam Mayor.
Mr. President,
Mr. Mosby.
I think for clarification as well, I thought I heard Ms. Underwood say that her meeting was 2 weeks ago. That would have been the same night as oh, she said 3. Okay, I wanted to be clear.
Well, she may have said 2, but yes, clarification, it was 3
Okay.
weeks ago.
Thank you.
Rules and public policy.
Thank you. Our meeting was held on April 27th, and I believe the minutes that were just approved by council did make note that some things about that meeting were mentioned in the previous council meeting, but to go over more appropriately what we talked about, a couple issues. We had previous minutes from the previous committee, which no one on our committee was on that committee. So we did discuss and agreed to accept those minutes as submitted on behalf of that committee. And we will include a note that just says that they were submitted from a previous committee, and then that'll get forwarded to the clerk so that the clerk can, when she's shaking her head.
What?
It's a committee with the committee and the other committee.
I'll talk to my committee about it.
Anyway, we'll forward the minutes and appropriate notations about those minutes to the clerk for submittal as a public record. Then we also talked about the hard copy for the charter. And at the time, we were still trying to verify some of the appropriate verbiage for the updated section 3.05, which came from ordinance 7-2019. And we agreed that the text from that ordinance is what would be used in the charter. And then we also talked about section 10.02 of the charter, which is the Civil Service Commission part where they used a question in the charter instead of a statement as it related to the qualifications of the police chief, fire chief, and the public works director. Now, since that meeting, I did some research today and did find the legislation that stated what the charter should say. I have also contacted American Legal Services, or whatever the name is, American Legal Ohio, about getting that information updated online, because even the new section 305 has not been included on the online version. So I talked to someone there. They gave me some ideas or a general process that I'll be able to get the information together, forward that to them, and they'll update those sections of the charter in the online version. Having said that, at this point, I don't think it's appropriate to put together a paper document, a hard copy that can be used for the official hard copy in the city right now. What else? There was some discussion about creating another charter review commission, or possibly using the petition process for some additional charter changes in the near future. There was some discussion about council's authority concerning the appointment of a building official, and a discussion about the codified ordinances that reference campers, trailers, RVs, motor vehicles in front yards, etc. We talked very briefly about changes to the rules of council. Really, we didn't talk anything about them, just that we need to talk about them. And then we did talk a little bit about the use of electronic documents for the council as a whole, particularly as it related to our online meetings. And then in the future, making some sort of standard process so that those documents can be more readily available to the public, or for the clerk to post in our online storage location, whatever that really means. And I believe that covers everything. Our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, May the 26th, 6:30.
Mr. President.
Ms. Orr.
Mr. O'Shea, I would like to point out, especially since Mr. Dieters is on the line, at the last meeting, he did state that he has a copy of the charter that would include all the updates, and he would disseminate that to us. So I don't want you to put a whole lot of time into that if he already has the document that you're going to put time into. Just,
Mr. President.
Mr. O'Shea.
There has been a compiled document available for quite some time, but I'm pretty sure that it does not have the update 305, since that doesn't exist online yet, and it doesn't update the 10.02 that we've talked about. So the document, if you remember, Ms. Zor, particularly, I had presented a document at a previous council meeting for review, and then we realized we needed to find out what the appropriate verbiage for the new section 305 was. So that's kind of where it's been hanging out there.
Okay, thank you, Mr. O'Shea. Any ad hoc reports?
Mr. President.
Mr. O'Shea.
As representative of the North College Hill Chamber of Commerce, we had an executive board meeting, maybe on the 7th of May, where we met with the SACA representative, that is the Southern Ohio Chamber Alliance, discussing, now that we're a member, an official chamber and a member of SACA, they provide benefits for other chambers. And we had a meeting with the rep to discuss what benefits would be helpful to our community and our chamber. And we also purchased a new domain name, which will be nchchamber.com. Unfortunately, it's not actually, it doesn't forward to the right location at this time. So we're still using the old one, but we will have a new domain name of nchchamber.com in the very near future. Then we had a general membership meeting via Zoom. It was our first time on May the 14th. I believe we had 6 to 8 members in attendance. It was more of a what's going on, and just to try to stay in contact with some folks. And then the chamber also purchased a banner for the North College Hill graduating seniors. And I believe that banner was displayed in front of Pat Boss, the attorney Pat Boss's office as the parade went by. And then it will be moved or officially installed or mounted somewhere on the school property for future photo ops for the graduating class. I believe that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. O'Shea. Any other ad hoc reports? All right, we'll move into administrative reports. Thank you. Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I first want to say thanks to the Chamber of Commerce for all of their hard, diligent work that they do here in the city. I think that's great. And for those of you who did not attend the parade on Friday, it was really nice. The kids do this every year, but this year I can say was one of the best. It was more organized. I don't know if it's because the adults stepped in and the kids didn't have to plan it themselves, but it was really nice. And just to see all the support and even with the police officers, we appreciate them coming out, stepping up, helping, blocking the streets off for the kids. I know they were really excited after it was over. It took them a minute to calm down to get their caps and gowns, but it was well worth it. So again, thanks for everyone who contributed to that. On the same note, on the 15th, we know that some of our businesses open back up. It was nice for me to see that a lot of the business owners, some of them went in, particularly the barber shop right across from the school, and they did a thorough cleaning. I saw them pull out their chairs. It took them a few days to do it. I'm excited for the business to open back up, but we still have to be cautious. And we do know that this week, I believe on Thursday is when our restaurants will return to sitting down, where you can go in and sit down and eat. Although I'm excited about that, but I'm a little apprehensive as well, considering some of the things that I've seen on the news with our restaurants. So I think that, you know, I would ask that our business owners that have those type of restaurants, that they still would be cautious, and I'm sure that they will, and I'm sure that they'll set up their social distancing eating and establishments that way. But we're excited. I'm excited about that because more people get to go back to work, but I just, I'm not quite sure how to, to play out here. The final thing I have is, we know that we talked about a fire task force, and a meeting has been scheduled for the 27th at 6 p.m. after talking with Chief Fells. He wanted to meet initially with the group in person, and he is going to set up the social distancing seating at the meeting. It's a small group, and again, that'll be on the 27th at 6 p.m. When we get more details, if I could, I would send them out. But as of right now, that's all we have. We're trying to get it going, get it off the ground so we can see well, we know that there's a need. So we can just get things into action. Unfortunately, with the COVID, it sort of set us back a couple months. But we decided to go ahead and try to get a meeting scheduled. So that meeting is scheduled for the 27th at 6 p.m. And that's all I have.
Mr. President, I don't read lips very well, but I'm assuming that you were saying it's my turn. So
all right, we'll start over here. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Now we'll move on to the city administrator's report. Mr. Mosby, I apologize.
Thank you, Mr. President. To say that we're in extraordinary times is an understatement. Our state, our country, indeed our world hasn't seen a calamity of this proportion in this generation. On a national level, COVID-19 has caused the elimination of over 20 million jobs, causing our national unemployment rate to skyrocket to over 14%, the highest rate since the Great Depression nearly a century ago. Here in our home state, Governor DeWine described how in just 2 months, our state budget plummeted to an over $700 million deficit from a $200 million surplus, a swing of nearly $1 billion. Locally, we've experienced a similar fate. We saw our revenues for this month plunge by nearly $100,000 from the same time last year. Truthfully, we have no clear path ahead of us. We don't know what the month of June will bring. If the information from the state is any indication, we can expect our revenues in June to drop as much as 50% or an additional $110,000. That would be about $200,000 of lost revenues in 2 months. When you consider that our city has no reserve to provide temporary relief, the finances of our city are in a very fragile state. Previously, we had reduced our expectation for income tax revenues to approximately $2.5 million for 2020. 2 consecutive months of 6-figure decreases will force us to take further action to ensure that our city remains fiscally solvent for the year, meaning that our general fund expenses will not exceed our general fund revenues. Prior to April, we had been enjoying a modest surplus of projected tax revenues. On average, we should receive about $212,500 per month for the calendar year 2020. This equates to a quarterly average of $637,500. Through March, our actual income tax revenue was $718,416, or 12.7% above our projected average. It is important to realize, however, that these numbers were prior to the stay-at-home order being enforced and our businesses being ordered to close. We've already been given indication of the adverse impact we will see for the second quarter in May's tax receipts. Again, we had seen a decrease of nearly $100,000 from the same period last year. I must also note that when we learned of the changes that were coming, Mayor Nichols took immediate action to prepare us for the impact that we were going to experience. She issued the emergency proclamation, closed our public parks and facilities, and instructed administration to limit spending to only that which is essential. Additionally, we have already initiated the process for receiving public assistance from FEMA and provided passage of State Senate Bill 310. The state will provide us with an additional $103,000 of assistance from the CARES Act. I also want to emphasize that we have been doing our best to minimize expenses for the purpose of ensuring that we maintain an adequate public safety force. While we were staffing up to 6 on a shift in our fire department for several weeks, we are back down to 4. However, we have also been maintaining our police force throughout this entire period. Mr. President, again, I think it is important for everyone to be aware that right now we are keeping a very close watch on our finances. We are not looking to spend anything unless it is absolutely necessary. We have right now postponed training. Any projected capital expenses that we may have been looking at are on hold right now. Basically, we want to make sure that we are intact going through the remainder of this year. Obviously, we will be giving monthly reports to the Finance Committee, but I do think it's important that every council member understand the severity of what we've been experiencing so that they can understand where we are financially, why we are at that particular point, and what we will be planning on doing to move forward. That is all I have for tonight, Mr. President.
Mr. President. Mr. President.
Clearly, I was muted again. I apologize. Ms. Bailey.
You're good. Mr. Mosby, I appreciate that we're being fiscally aware and fiscally responsible, but are we billing correctly for whatever we're using? Are we billing to like the CARES Act for preliminary calls? I hear a lot of cutting, but have we reached out to see if we get any of this federal funds?
Yes, Ms. Bailey, I think I had said in there that we are, I've been reaching out to our state senator and state representative for, to see how the CARES Act is coming along, in which case we would receive funding for that. And as I had already, and as I had also, mentioned that we have already prepared our package, submitted our package for FEMA reimbursement. We cannot receive reimbursement from both sources. It would be in essence double dipping, but we are keeping track of all of our necessary expenses related to COVID-19, and we will be submitting that for reimbursement.
So even with reimbursement, are we looking pretty stark? Like coming out just like cool? What's our projections looking like?
Our projections right now are, as I mentioned, unclear since we only have 1 month of reduced revenues. Honestly, we'll have to look at what's going to happen in June. I think the one thing that we have in working for us or to our advantage is the fact that the governor has eased restrictions. And so as the mayor just previously said, businesses are opening up, which means that jobs will be back. And of course, if jobs are back, that means payroll revenue or payroll taxes will be paid again. One of the things that it should also be mentioned is that unlike larger cities, we don't see the immediate impact. We are basically lagging. And so the impact of what this means to us may be as much as 2, 3, perhaps even 4 months behind. We're just uncertain at this particular point.
Cool. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Mosby. Next on the agenda, the law director's report. Ms. Dewald.
Thank you. I tried unmuting, but it didn't help me. So, Mr. Mosby, if you have some of your report on paper, would you be able to send that to me? There's a lot of very important information there that needs to be recorded accurately. When Ms. Hall gave her report, I failed to ask for a paper report. So I wanted to make sure hers was recorded accurately as well. Like you said, we are under extraordinary situations, and I just want to make sure that this is reported. Is that a possibility that you could send that to me?
Mr. President?
Mr. Mosby.
Yes, ma'am. I can forward that to you, and then I'll also ask Ms. Hall to send her copy to you as well.
Oh, does she have a report tonight too?
No, she's not reporting tonight, but if
okay.
you don't have one, she can forward that to you.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Dieters, do you have anything?
Mr. President, members of council, I do not have anything specific this evening. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them as they arise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dieters. We'll move on to call of members. Ms. Bailey.
I have nothing.
Thank you. Mr. Hedger.
I don't have anything.
Thank you. Ms. Underwood.
I don't have anything. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Miller Novak.
I do not have everything or anything. I just said everything. I don't have anything.
If you'd just been muted, we'd never heard that.
I know. Mary DeWald, don't you dare put that in there.
All right. Thank you, sir. Ms. Zorb.
Sorry, I guess I'm odd man out. I have a question for, I presume, Mr. Mosby. I believe I asked one other time and I'm not sure I got an answer, so I'm going to try it again. I thought, and I understand we're curbing our expenses, but I thought we were under contract for the street sweeping. So if we are, do we know if that is going to be scheduled, and I will chime in for Ms. Hartman and say, also with all the rain that's coming down, are the sewers being cleaned also? Thanks, Mayor.
Mr. President.
Mr. Mosby.
Thank you. So the street sweeping contract is being renewed. However, what we are looking at is what is going to be feasible for us to do, obviously, for this year. I know that last year when we did it, we had it for about 8, I believe it was 8 weeks during the summer. Actually, no, I'm sorry. It began in May, so we had, I believe, 10 weeks. So what we're probably looking at is beginning in June and then moving forward from there. So yes, it will occur, but it will occur on a decreased level. As far as the sewers are concerned, yes, we certainly are. And one of the things that we're also doing is obviously if there are certain sewers that you know that are being that are problems, it would certainly help if you would let me know, and then we can address those. There was a question about a sewer line on Center Ridge. A specific residence was asking about that, but obviously those drains were being replaced. So there was a quote unquote a water issue, at least according to the resident. But as I talked to the engineers, that pipe was actually a larger pipe. And so that water issue should be resolved there. There are going to be pipes laid when they work on the Galbraith project this year, Galbraith and Goodman project. So they will also be replacing sewer pipes there with larger pipes to accommodate the water. And so, yes, there definitely are several projects that are being worked on so that we can have proper drainage, obviously, in the city. But again, if you have specific ones, you can let me know. I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Well, I'll forward that to you in an email if that is all right. Should I send it to you or should I send it to Mr.
Yes.
All right, thank you. And then I have one other kind of housekeeping question. And I know this was brought up a long time ago and I was squashed when I brought up the comment, so I'll try it again. And again, petty, but I think it's impactful in the long run. The group email address that is the name of the group email address is North College Hill City Council, but there are a lot of names on that are not City Council. And I feel, this is my opinion, that is misleading to anyone who sends an email to City Council and it gets to an unexpected audience. So if anyone else agrees with me, disagrees with me, I'd like to hear that, but I don't know. That's kind of where I stand on that.
Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Ms. Underwood.
I actually agree with Ms. Zorb. I think that if the name of the email group is North College Hill City Council, then it should just be the members of council as well as the president of council.
Mr. President.
Ms. Bailey.
Just so I'm clear, we're talking about the council at North College Government, northcollegehill.org group. Like that's the email. It just says council.
I don't know the exact name of it, but I know it says North College Hill Council. Whatever, I don't know what the exact order is, whether it says council at North College Hill or North College Hill Council.
Okay, no, like I'm just making sure that I'm understanding which one it is, because like the NCH Council one, I don't even know. I'm sorry, I didn't even know there was a difference in that other people were getting this. I agree with Ms. Lord and Ms. Underwood if that's the case.
Council at northcollegehill.org.
that is routed to a different group other than council and the president of council?
There are additional names on that, yes.
Mr. President,
Ms. Nichols?
I just had a question. Are you saying email separate from, to say if like the mayor isn't on there or the city administrator? So you're talking about emails and legislative things that just to council, not including those other two?
Yes,
Okay.
in a nutshell.
Mr. President,
Can I
Ms.
ask
Dewell.
why?
I kind of explained it, but I think it's misleading. I think if I want, if any resident wants to send an email to council, then the anticipated audience for that is council. If administration wants to put together their own distribution list, then by golly, please do. But it should be called administration and it shouldn't be called council.
So
Mr.
what if, Mr. President, sorry,
no,
I was going,
Ms. Dewald?
thank you. And I had to give a response to Mr. Mosby today, and that then brought me to our city council rules. So in my response, I read under what I have to do as a clerk and what I need to receive. And it says that I need to send an email to the members of council, the mayor, and city administrator. So it led me to believe that when it says members, that it should only be members. The mayor and the city administrator, I don't think should be included on that email list. And there were other places I've read in here in times past where it mentions just contact council. So if we just want to contact council, we've got to put in each name individually to avoid sending it out to the people who are not on council.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Bailey?
so I think that council, I get, but however, if it's a member of the public and they send it to all of council and clerk of council, then doesn't it become a communication, which then the mayor and the city administrator would receive? Or like, I guess I'm just a little confused.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood?
it seems like there's a really easy fix to this. Like, can't we just create a separate or a different email list for just the members of council and the president of council, and then just leave the one that's in place, but maybe rename it to make sure people understand that it's council and administration, or North College Hill government, or something to that effect. That seems like a really easy fix.
Mr. Mosby, is this something that you can make happen, sir?
Yes, we will I'll have our IT person create a different list tomorrow. I would just like to say, however, that if a piece of correspondence comes to council, excuse me, but it is a matter of public record. And so if it is a matter of public record, I myself, as part of the administration and the mayor, would need to see it anyway. So I have no problem with doing what Ms. Zorb had asked. I just don't know if that is being redundant or trying to set up I don't know, just an additional system, but that's fine. Yes, I can do that tomorrow.
Thank you. Is that all, Ms. Zorb?
Yes.
Mr. President,
Ms. Bailey?
with following up with that, I know that, like, real quick and just bringing it out, I have access to like set up my own page on the website. It's a draft. It's been a long time, but I also have access to upload documents to the document center, like approved minutes. Mr. Mosby, can we see that everybody has like that privilege? By
Mr.
privilege, I
President,
mean it's allowed on the website.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
actually, Mr. Mosby and I are going to meet this week about document standards. So I'll certainly discuss that with him. It seems like it's in the same wheelhouse. So, you know, we're going to meet so that we can get our document standards kind of in place so that everybody can upload their minutes as well as their agendas in a standard and consistent manner. So I'll make sure that, you know, I'll certainly discuss that with him.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President,
Ms. Hartman, it's your turn.
Thank you. I just want to say that the parade was nice for the seniors. It was nice to see that go by, and I wish them all the best with their success in their future. And with everything getting warmer outside and people are gathering more and having friends over, it's not of my concern how many people show up at someone's house, but I hope our citizens choose wisely of who they're having over. Some things were going to get out of hand this past weekend, and I just don't want to see any violence become the thing with all this that's going on. So stay safe.
Thank you, Mr. O'Shea.
That's it.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to reiterate what Ms. Underwood mentioned during her report, that I had brought up the idea or the concern about our sidewalks throughout the city. Two main issues. Again, one, that cars are parked in the driveway blocking the sidewalk, which ends up forcing pedestrians to move out into the street. And if you're pushing a stroller or with a young child, it's very unsafe to have the child, even the adult, to be walking in the street just because the car blocking the driveway. Now, I know Chief Schran has responded to an email and basically said, well, you know, because of COVID and because there's limited parking, you know, unfortunately, those seem kind of weak excuses to me, especially when you walk down the street and you see plenty of on-street parking in many of those places. Additionally, you see that cars are not fully in their driveways, and you also see cars that have no one in the driveway, and yet they only park partially in, blocking the sidewalk. So I'm hoping that from a safety standpoint, our police department will do their duty and knock on doors, or if anything, put warnings or citations on the vehicles that are causing the problem. And additionally, we've been doing a lot of walking around the neighborhood, and we've noticed that there are many sidewalks that are trip hazards, if you will. And I hope that as the spring comes forth, that Mr. Knight or whomever will be able to go around and try to move forward with getting our sidewalks taken care of. One other question, or an actual question that I have, well, another statement, I would also agree with Ms. Zorb and others that the name of an email group should accurately reflect the group members. And then the question I have is, when do we resume in-person meetings? So I don't know at what point we need to discuss that as a council. If there's some legal issues that we need to address before we can do that, or what the options are there. Obviously, we can't talk about it unless we're in an open meeting. So I don't know if now's the time. We want to wait 2 weeks and talk about it, or you know, what's the next step in moving back to in-person meetings? Those are my thoughts and concerns.
So, I mean, good, I'm not muted. I certainly am looking forward to the time when we can get back to meeting in person. Not that this hasn't been great, and it was good to have the technology. You know, I think we probably need to plan on the June meeting being done this way. And, you know, for my opinion, starting to look at the July meeting as maybe one where we can break quarantine. That's my opinion. Okay, thank you, Mr. O'Shea. We'll move on to legislation.
Here it is. I have a third reading of ordinance 3/2020, an ordinance amending chapter 1359 of the codified ordinance of the city of North College Hill. Third reading.
Mr. President,
Ms. Bailey,
I'd like to make a motion that we adopt Resolution 3, 2020.
Ordinance?
that is ordinance, Ms. Bailey.
Sorry, Mr. President, I rescind. I would like to make a motion that we adopt Ordinance 3, 2020.
Thank you. Motion by Ms.
Mr.
Bailey.
President,
Mr. Hedger.
I'll second.
Motion for Ms. Bailey, second for Mr. Hedger to adopt ordinance 3/2020. Discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Bailey,
Yes.
Mr. Hedger,
Yes.
Ms. Underwood,
Yes.
Mr. Miller Novak,
Yes.
Ms. Zorb,
Yes.
Ms. Hartman,
Yes.
Mr. O'Shea,
Yes.
Mr. President, motion passes 7-0.
Thank you, ma'am.
We also have on the agenda Resolution 6/2020. A resolution authorizing participation in the ODOT road salt contracts awarded in 2020 and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President,
Ms. Bailey,
I'd like to make a motion that we adopt Resolution 6, 2020.
motion by Ms. Bailey to
Mr.
adopt
President.
resolution 6/2020. Mr. Hedger.
I'll second.
Motion for Ms. Bailey, second for Mr. Hedger to adopt resolution 6/2020. Discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Bailey,
Yes.
Mr. Hedger,
Yes.
Ms. Underwood,
Yes.
Mr. Miller Novak,
Yes.
Ms. Zorb,
Yes.
Ms. Hartman,
Yes.
Mr. O'Shea,
Yes.
Mr. President, motion passes 7-0.
Thank you, ma'am.
The third piece of legislation is a resolution 7/2020. A resolution authorizing the city of North College Hill to prepare and submit an application to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission State Capital Improvement and/or Local Transportation Improvement programs, and to execute contracts as required.
Mr. President,
Ms. Bailey,
I'd like to make a motion to adopt Resolution 7, 2020.
we have a motion for Ms. Bailey to adopt resolution 7/2020.
Mr. President,
Mr. President.
Ms. Zorb.
I'll second that motion.
Motion for Ms. Bailey, second for Ms. Zorb to adopt resolution 7/2020. Discussion? Please call the roll.
Ms. Bailey,
Yes.
Mr. Hedger,
Yes.
Ms. Underwood,
Yes.
Mr. Miller Novak,
Yes.
Ms. Zorb,
Yes.
Ms. Hartman,
Yes.
Mr. O'Shea.
Yes.
Mr. President, motion passes 7-0.
Thank you, Ms. Dewald. Moving on to old business.
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
I'm not certain when we're going to talk about the salary or the wage ordinance, is that something that we can continue to push down the road, or what's going on with that?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bailey.
Miss Underwood, as we just saw that, well, the Finance Committee just saw that our last meeting. I think we definitely need to get together soon. I don't know if it should be under old business or new business, though.
Well, we've definitely discussed it before. We requested the ordinance before because we wanted to make sure that Ms. Hall's position was included in the ordinance. So that's why I thought it would be old business. In any event, I know that has to happen maybe in executive session. And I was just wondering if that was something that we could do at another meeting, or if that's something that needs to happen sooner rather than later. I'm just kind of asking the question.
Mr.
Mueller?
Sorry, guys, my phone and the flood advisory, my bad. Mr. President,
Ms. Bailey.
perhaps we should schedule or put it into new business to schedule a special meeting for executive session, or add it to our next meeting.
Okay.
Mr. President,
Mr. O'Shea.
maybe I missed something from the last meeting and didn't notice it in the minutes. What is this for a whole new, for the new year, or are we just talking about Ms. Hall's position? And if so, I thought that was already addressed.
Mr. President,
Ms. Bailey.
if I may, we had asked for a new salary ordinance based off of our council meeting in early March, roughly. And so the Finance Committee did get the new salary ordinance with all of the corrected changes and positions. And so I think it's about going into it as a whole and not just a position or a person. But it is something that all of council needs to talk about speak about, as this will be probably a decent template for the future with salaries.
So we can move the executive session discussion to new business.
Mr. President,
Mr. O'Shea.
I'm not sure if at this point an executive session is really necessary. If we're just talking about positions and salary for those positions and method of pay, et cetera, that we're not talking about anyone individually. Obviously we can move into executive session if necessary, but I don't know if that's really something we need to entertain at this time. Do we have an actual piece of legislation that has not been brought to the floor yet?
Mr. President?
Ms. Bailey.
Yes, sir, we do.
Should we bring it to the floor?
Yes, sir. We'll bring it to the floor.
Mr. President,
Ms. Zorb.
I must have got lost in the shuffle. Did Ms. Bailey just agree to bring that document to the council floor before it was discussed in committee? Is that what maybe I misheard? I don't know. But I thought that's what I heard.
No, ma'am.
Okay.
Mr. President.
Ms. Bailey.
Mr. Dieters, please. Can a committee go into executive session?
Yes, they can go into executive session for the same purposes that a council can go into executive session, Ms. Bailey.
Awesome. Cool. Mr. President, I move that we talk about this in new business.
I'm sorry, Ms. Bailey, I missed what you just said.
So I don't know if we can talk about this now, but I would really like to schedule an executive session for the Finance Committee. I don't want to overspeak or misspeak or any of that. And no, ma'am, I do not want to bring this to the council floor at all, but I would like to go into executive committee for the finance. And I'm sorry, Jim, and I'm sorry, Miss Mary Jo, that I had a little attitude for a moment, but can we talk about that in new business?
Mr. Miller Novak.
I mean, it's going to be up to Finance Committee whether or not they go into executive session and need to be discussed at Finance Committee. I mean, it's the council as a whole can't vote on what the Finance Committee does.
Mr. President,
Ms. Bailey.
I'd like to move to new business.
If there is no other old business, we will move to new business. All right, new business.
Mr. President,
Ms. Bailey.
for the members of the Finance Committee, is there a time that you guys could get together for a special meeting in the upcoming days or weeks?
Miss Bailey, I am available every night this week.
Thank you. Mr. Hedger,
I'm available Thursday and Wednesday.
Ms. Sunderland,
I am available Thursday and Friday.
no, Wednesday. Can everybody do Thursday at 7:15 for a special finance meeting?
Yes.
Mr. Mosby, will you please post that to our website? Thursday at 7:15, we have a special finance meeting.
Mr. President,
Mr. Mosby.
yes, we can post that on the website.
Thank you.
So Ms.
Mr.
Bailey
President,
confirming that is for Thursday at 7:15. And she just disconnected. She's gone.
She got what she wanted. She left.
We'll see if she comes back in. Any other new business?
Mr. President,
Mr. O'Shea.
the request for a special meeting has me thinking how this the legality of some of what we have done and what we just experienced. We know that the charter, at least under section 9, says that action by council shall be by ordinance, resolution, or motion. And what I didn't hear was a motion to establish a meeting or something. And I don't know, maybe, I know we've done it kind of that way for a long time, but it almost seems a violation of the charter in that sense. And we've done this, obviously we just sit around, we talk about it, and we're like, yeah, okay, everybody kind of agrees, but I don't know if we ever really officially make a motion and all of that. And then what, I guess where I'm really headed with this is multi-part concerns. Ms. Bailey asked if Mr. Mosby would post that notice, which then would lead me to ask, well, who really is responsible for posting that notice on the website, and or if it's a special meeting, although I guess if it's not a meeting of council, then it doesn't have to be served on each member personally or left at his or her usual place of residence. It just seems like we've been kind of all over the place on some of these meetings, and it's not clear, I guess, on what we should be doing. And maybe we've been getting away with it. Look, for years, I guess we got away with having executive session that was apparently illegal up until now. So, but of course, I've said this for a while, you can do whatever you want until somebody decides to sue you, right? But it doesn't mean we should continue to do it if we don't think it's appropriate or done correctly. So it just seems like some things got have been a little loose, and I'm not even real sure if we're not following our own charter, our rules, or whatever else.
Mr. President.
Mr. Miller Novak.
Yeah, I think it's a question for Bill, but I mean, it's a committee meeting, so it's not, I mean, they're not like special meetings of council in terms of limited. My understanding that it's not like you're limited to the topics in a notice for a scheduled meeting of committees. Committees are informal by nature. I mean, I'll defer. Is Bill still here?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. President, my opinion would be that they're not really actions of council, they're actions of a committee. So setting a meeting and doing it that way, it's not an action of council, it's an action of the committee. So you should be, I mean, I don't see any foul of the charter or any ordinance in that respect.
Mr. President?
Mr. O'Shea.
I guess my concern in this particular case would be the fact that it is not a regularly scheduled meeting, which makes it a special meeting as it relates to the Open Meetings Act. Even though it's just committee, it's still a special meeting because it is not regularly scheduled. So any public body would still have to abide by the Open Meetings Act as it relates. So,
Yeah, Mr. President, my understanding was that it is going to be published with at least 24 hours notice. So I don't see why it should be a problem from the open meetings perspective.
I think, I'm sorry, Mr. President.
Mr. Miller Novak.
I mean, I think if you're worried about a concern in the finance committee, I mean, you should just say the purpose to discuss the salary ordinance, and while the finance committee meeting is occurring, to just limit the conversation to the to the salary ordinance and not talk about other things if you're concerned about it.
Okay, so Ms. Bailey has rejoined for the record. All right, is there other new business? Or I guess Ms. Bailey, since you got disconnected, were you finished?
Yes, I was finished with that, with scheduling a special meeting. I'll make sure the notices are properly handled as far as getting the one tonight to Mr. Mosby, who can post it correctly on the internet, and posting it in due time on the finance committee members' doors. The second thing I have real quick though in new business is, can we start, and I don't know, it might be a gray area, can we start sending Ms. Dewald our committee reports so that way she doesn't, like, to be added to the agenda so she doesn't have to, like, type them? Is that a thing?
Mr. President,
Ms. Underwood.
that's actually what Mr. Mosby and I are going to meet about this week and work on, so that there is a standard with regard to all committee reports, as well as agendas and meeting minutes, all documents of council so that everything is done in the same way. So I plan to have something to report back to council at the next regularly scheduled meeting. We should be able to get that together between Mr. Mosby and myself.
Mr. President,
Ms. Bailey?
Ms. Underwood, that would be awesome. Thank you so much. Like,
Mr. President,
Ms. DeWild?
before we conclude this meeting, in old business, Ms. Bailey asked if she could call for a meeting, a special finance meeting to go into executive session. And then under new business, she only asked to set up a special finance committee meeting. So do I need to be concerned about what happened with the executive session request and if one is going to take place?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bailey?
I would hope, Ms. Sewell, that we would have not only the piece of legislation that goes over to the budget, like with the budget for that special meeting, and to go into executive session over the salary ordinance. I don't know how to write that, and that, I guess that's why I said it would be posted accordingly and on every finance committee member's doorstep.
Okay, so Mr. President,
Ms. DeWild?
so all I need is clarification. Are you hoping to go into executive session, or are we just going to have a meeting, and do I need to record any of that information? Can I just put it under discussion? Executive session and special meeting was considered. Hello?
Well, I think,
Mr. Mr. President, Mr. Dieters, Mr.
Ms. Bailey?
Dieters. Mr. Dieters, so can we write a catch-all agenda for a special meeting, special budget and finance committee meeting and executive session to discuss the potential salaries of city employees legally?
Not sure exactly what your question is. Could set up a meeting, and you could say for the purposes of discussing the salary ordinance and to enter into executive session to do so, all that could be in one statement. Catch-alls are a little
not like a catch-all. I'm sorry, I'll rephrase. Basically, we need to go into an executive session in a committee meeting, and we need an agenda that says that we can do so. Can you help me out with that?
Yeah, I think the way you expect, somebody explained it before, to go into a special finance committee meeting to discuss the salary ordinance in executive session.
Cool. Ms. Sewell, Mr. President, Ms. Sewell,
Yes,
you will
ma'am.
have the appropriate minutes or whatever 24 hours before we go into it. And no, ma'am, you are not expected to take minutes. I will take minutes.
Oh, no, and no, I already know that. My concern was executive session was mentioned and then that thought wasn't completed. So I didn't want to leave that as an incomplete thought in the minutes. So now I know that a special finance meeting will be held with the possibility of going into executive session.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Mr. President,
Ms. Zorb?
apparently I need clarification now because I was under the impression that that whole charter amendment we just went through made it possible for us to not have to announce executive session ahead of time. Thought that was the whole point. So we could be like right now, we could decide to go into executive session and it did not have to be posted ahead of time. I thought that was the whole point. Did I miss the point again?
No.
Mr. President,
Mr. Miller Novak?
The point of the charter amendment is so we could have executive sessions and regular meetings.
Like the one we're in right now. Like right now, we could call for an executive session.
Yes, if we wanted to, because it's a regular meeting, yes. Yes,
That would be the same during a finance committee meeting, would it not?
well, there can be a difference between regular and special meetings, but yeah, like during a regular finance committee meeting, you guys could call to go into executive session at any time.
Thank you.
Any other new business?
Mr. President,
Mr. Miller Novak.
if there is no further new business, I move that we adjourn tonight's meeting.
Mr. President,
Ms. Zorb.
I will second Mr. Miller Novak's adjournment.
Motion from Mr. Miller Novak, second from Ms. Zorb. Call the roll, please.
One moment. Oh, what the heck. Miss Bailey,
Yes.
Mr. Hedger,
Yes.
Miss Underwood,
Yes.
Mr. Miller Novak,
Yes.
Ms. Zorb,
Yes.
Ms. Hartman,
Yes.
Mr. O'Shea.
Yes.
Motion to adjourn passes 7-0.
Thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned.
Good night.